Well, now that the Florida Supreme Court approved the wording of a constitutional amendment legalizing medical marijuana, what's next? What does this mean for us here in Florida?
I think there's two big things to keep in mind when we're talking about the legalization of medical marijuana. First of all, it's new. It's new to our country, and it's certainly new to the state of Florida. Two states that started us on this journey in 2012 were Colorado and Wyoming. And that was just 3 years ago. And they just started legalizing it, and it wasn't even starting to sell in those two states until 2014. So we have to keep in mind that we are in really new territory, and it's going to be a long journey to figure out how this is all going to play out. The second thing that's adding a lot of layers of complexity is that we have a system of governance where we have federal law, state law, and local and city law. And if you look at the landscape, the legal landscape for medical marijuana right now, under federal law, marijuana is still classified as the Schedule I controlled substance, and therefore it's illegal under federal law. About half the states have made medical marijuana legal. And then we have city and local counties, such as in the state of Florida, among 20 or so, have decriminalized having 20 grams or less of marijuana in your possession because of this issue. So they're now not arresting, they're giving you civil fines. So you have to kind of look at this under those lenses of complexity and newness.
Okay, and Adam, you think it's guaranteed. I mean, it probably is coming to Florida and will be legalized.
I would be very surprised if it wasn't. When this was on the ballot in 2014, a majority of Floridians did vote in support of medical marijuana. So if you look at the trend around the country, as you can see, this is a trend. More and more states are legalizing this. So you went from 2 states in 2012 to now you're at about half of them. This is an issue that is going to pop up.
Okay, but as we were saying before we started this segment, we're learning from the other states that have already passed it, right, Sheryl?
Absolutely, and that's always what happens when you have something new happening. So, you know, we're seeing this with fantasy gaming. We're seeing all sorts of new issues, the e-cigarette vaping industry. We have a client in that industry, and so they're having to look at all of the newness and the uncertainty surrounding these businesses, and as business lawyers, we have to counsel our clients on this. And what's interesting about medical marijuana is that it's not just the people who are entering these businesses, such as the nurseries and the dispensaries and everyone around that. It's also day-to-day employers, business owners, who now have to decide, how are we going to handle, if this is passed in our state, how are we going to handle dealing with someone who comes to the work and they're taking medical marijuana legally, and yet it's still illegal under federal law, and their employee handbook doesn't address this.
That's complicated.
It's
I mean,
very
so
complicated.
How will that be worked out? Is that something that will be addressed before they legalize it? Something the voters will discuss? That's so complicated.
And that's part of the complexity with this. And with every new industry, you have to allow time for the laws to play out. So what's going on in Colorado is almost being viewed as the model state where other states are looking for and looking towards as guidance as to what to do for their laws. While it's not binding in Florida what Colorado does, Florida is looking at what Colorado is doing, as are other states. So this issue about employees was addressed in Colorado in a case called Coates versus Dish Network. And this was a situation of exactly where we said, where this was a quadriplegic that had the right to use medical marijuana for muscle spasms and failed a drug test. Ultimately, the Colorado Supreme Court found that the use of medical marijuana was grounds for termination because it was illegal under federal law and because the laws weren't clear. Now, other states, for example, such as Minnesota, have addressed this by statute and said employees who use medical marijuana are protected from termination in most situations. So what will Florida do? We're not really sure. Florida is going to look at other states and use those other states as guidance for what they're going to do.
Now, you said in the last election, the support was pretty high. As you can imagine, you'd expect the support to continue to be high. So what happens next? Will we expect to see it on the ballot? What do Florida residents need to know?
Yes, right now they're having to get enough votes to get it on the ballot. They have enough votes right now, but they need to get more in order to deal with the fact that a lot of them get thrown out. So do they have enough? Do they not have enough? But most people believe that they will have enough to get this on the ballot in 2016. It has been approved, the ballot language for the amendment has been approved by the Florida Supreme Court. So that's checked off the list. So it really depends on what the public does when they go to their, their booth and they vote. So it was over 57%. So it was less than 3% margin of loss in 2014. We're 2 years later now, by the time we go to vote, with all these other states now adopting it. And I personally think that some of it is what's happened with the pain pills, and people are starting to see that, well, there's a lot of abuse of pain medications and oxycodone. Is marijuana for medical purposes really worse, or should it also be allowed for medical purposes? Legalizing it for all purposes is a whole nother ballgame.
Now, between now and then, also, a lot of Florida counties have addressed this issue. And what makes medical marijuana such a complicated issue, and marijuana in general, is you have state, federal, and local laws. For example, last week, Palm Beach County elected to decriminalize it and make it more of a civil citation, the same way, instead of an arrest, an officer would have the opportunity to simply issue a fine. So a lot has changed between 2014, when this was on the ballot, and now.
So that's showing that individual counties can kind of take control of it as well.
Adding
Yes.
to the
see.
confusion.
Yeah,
Adding to
it's-
yep.
Yeah.
so hopefully they get this all panned out, and or we'll be seeing a lot of lawsuits if it's
Seeing lawsuits and seeing, just challenges. People who are trying to run a business, like our clients, are trying to run their business, and they have to try to figure out, how do we deal with this? Their HR personnel all has to be trained to handle this. There's also safety considerations and all sorts of businesses that are cropping up. We have another client, Snoop Guard, that has an incredible portable container to help create safety around this. If you have consumables like cookies, brownies, and other drugs that you're taking for cancer or what have you that have marijuana in them, how do you store these things safely so that children and pets and other people don't get into them and they're not intended to be consuming these? So you have all these interesting industries cropping up around this issue as well.
All right, will be something to see, and we'll be playing out shortly. All right,
Absolutely.
Sheryl Hunter and Adam Hersh, both attorneys with Hunter Business Law, thank you so much for joining us
Our
today.
pleasure.
You're very
Thank you.
knowledgeable and
Thank you
helpful.
for having
Thank
us.
you. Thanks.